Do you ever sometimes look at your final photos and then you cringe at the way the final edit looks? Or perhaps you're editing a photo right now in Lightroom or in Capture One, and no matter what angle you're looking at it, it just doesn't look right. If that's something that's happened to you, then today I'm going to be sharing some common mistakes I see food photographers make when they're editing their photos and what you should be doing instead. So let's jump straight into them. So the first mistake I see commonly being made by food photographers is not using local adjustments when you're editing. So what do I mean by this exactly? Well, whether you're using a program such as Lightroom or Capture One, you actually have the ability to make both global adjustments and local adjustments. Global adjustments are when the edit is made to the entire photo. So let's say I increase the exposure, then the exposure increases across the whole photo. On the other hand, local adjustments are when you target specific areas of the photos in which you want to make your adjustment. So instead of increasing the exposure across the whole of the photo, you selectively brush the areas in which you want to make the adjustment and then only increase the exposure in that area. Now, the benefit of using local adjustments is that it allows you to have so much more creativity and storytelling ability when it comes to your final image. With local adjustments, you're able to target very specific areas of your photos and to change things like exposure, color, white balance to those specific areas. And it's local adjustments that will really help to highlight what is special about your food and that particular image. So perhaps you want to highlight a certain texture, or perhaps you want to highlight a certain ingredient. Maybe you want to bring out a certain color. It's your ability to work with local adjustment that's going to allow you to do all of this. So in this example over here, I can actually change the color of the frosting on the loaf cake from a pink to a purple without even affecting the berries if I really wanted. Or perhaps I just want to saturate the color of the frosting without really saturating any other parts of the image. Maybe I'm happy with the berries and the yellows of the loaf cake, but I just want to saturate the frosting. I can do this really easily without affecting other parts of the image and making the photo look unrealistic. Or like in this example over here, I can actually change the color of the chopsticks so that they actually match the hue of the background a bit more by making it more turquoise than the original green color. I feel like turquoise blends in with the overall image, but I don't want to change any of the other blues and greens in the image. Now, if I was only using global adjustments, then this would actually affect the green parts of the image, such as the broccoli and the peas and even the background. So if you're not using local adjustments as part of your editing workflow, I highly recommend you start doing that right now. Okay, another mistake I commonly see photographers make when it comes to editing is under editing. Now, this may sound unusual because a lot of educators will tell you not to over edit, and I completely agree with that. But if you're shooting in RAW format, which I highly recommend you do, then the original file is screaming for you to add your own processing to it. The RAW file will be flat. It usually has no contrast, depth, or saturation. And it's your job to add all that. Now, what I see commonly photographers do is just pull the sliders a little bit over here and a little bit over there. But I highly recommend that you push your sliders beyond what looks natural, and stay with me here. So you push it beyond what looks natural and then bring it back down. So this will really allow you to see how far you can actually push your edits. Now, I'm not saying that you make your image look unnatural, gritty, or artificial, but what I am saying is to experiment with the sliders just to see how far you can actually push them. So as an example, let's take a look at this image over here. Now, this photo does have some minor edits to it, but one of my favorite things to add to the photo is to add a little bit of clarity to my images. And this really helps to give the image contrast and saturation. Now, what I commonly see photographers do is push the slider a little bit to add a small amount of contrast by pushing that clarity slider. But what I'm asking you to do is, with any slider or tool you're using within your editing program, push it beyond the limit to see what will look natural. Just like what I've done over here, and then you can always work backwards and go down. But don't be scared to see what the effect will be, because different images will require different amounts of pushing on the sliders. Now, I think we can all agree that at some point the clarity does look unnatural, but depending on what the lighting conditions are like, depending on the texture of the food, depending on the angle of the camera, there are times when you may need to push the sliders beyond their limits. Now, if it looks unnatural, bring it right back down, but don't be scared to push the sliders just to see the effect that they'll have. In some images, you might not want to use the tool to its maximum ability, but sometimes you might. So get into that habit of experimenting. Okay, the next mistake I commonly see being made in editing is ignoring composition. Yes, in editing. Now, a lot of emphasis is made on composition on set, whether it's using compositional rules, such as the rule of thirds and the phi grid, or even tethering and seeing your compositions come to life live on screen. But you can also use your compositional tools inside of your editing software. So as an example, if you're using something like Capture One or even Lightroom, you can actually select compositional grids inside of the program, such as the golden ratio or even the Fibonacci spiral, and then use these compositional grids to aid in your cropping. Now, this will help you make your hero image stand out by guiding you to the best crop for that particular image. Now, I do have a few more mistakes that I know you're likely making because I used to make these exact same mistakes too. But before I dive into those, I want to invite you to my free food photography masterclass, all about how to take stunning food photos and actually make a business where you're making money from food photography. I'm going to be covering the exact marketing techniques that I use to make six figures in my own photography business, how I'm able to get clients such as Cafe Nero, Cinnabon, Nespresso, my complete cold pitch process, as well as common mistakes food photographers are making that are resulting in flat photos. The link to the free class is in the description box below. Okay, so on to another common mistake I see photographers make when editing, and that's using presets. Now, do I recommend presets or am I telling you not to use them? Well, I actually do recommend you use presets, but if you are to purchase presets, don't purchase presets from a wedding photographer or an event photographer or a portrait photographer or even a product photographer. If you're a food photographer, you need to get presets that are very specific for food. I personally feel presets are a great way to familiarize yourself with a particular program, as well as acquaint yourselves with different styles of editing, especially if you're new to editing and you're not sure how certain tools within a program work. They also work great if you're stuck in a rut and you want to add some creativity and originality to your images, but don't know where to start. Now, the mistake I see when people use presets is buying landscape presets and then applying them to food. And then the second mistake I see is not customizing them to their photography. Now, I also sell presets and you can actually purchase them for a very special price using the link below. But I always advise my students to keep an eye on two things and to customize two sliders for their own photos whilst using these presets. And those two things are number one, white balance, and number two, exposure. Now, those are two things that I cannot control for you. So even if you were to purchase presets, you need to make sure you have the correct white balance for your particular photo and the right brightness in your food photos depending on your style of lighting. Okay. Another mistake I commonly see when photographers are editing their photos is over-editing. Now, I know I mentioned just a minute ago about under-editing, but over-editing is also a common problem I see amongst food photographers. Now, the aim of editing is to tell a story and to enhance the emotions that are already present in the image. But with food photography in particular, we eat with our eyes first. At the end of the day, food needs to look realistic in order to look delicious and appetizing. If the food looks unnatural, especially when it comes to color, then our brain is just not going to perceive these as normal or natural or delicious. So whilst playing around and pushing their sliders to their limits, also ensure that your food is still looking normal and natural to the eye instead of over-processed and fake. Okay, on to another editing mistake I commonly see amongst photographers, and that's not saving the final image in the correct specification. So, have you ever found that your photo looks perfect when you see it on screen, but then when you send it to a client, they complain that the quality is not good, or that it didn't print out correctly, or that it's blurred, or the colors aren't looking right, or perhaps it looks perfect in Lightroom, but then you upload to your blog and suddenly it's blurred. Now, if that's happened to you, the likelihood is you haven't correctly saved the final image. So before exporting your photo, think about where that photo is going to end up. Is it for web? Is it for print? Is it going to end up on Instagram or perhaps on your blog? Does the client want to put it on a billboard, or are they going to use it on an iPad menu? Where the photo will end up dictates what specifications you're going to save your photo in, whether that comes to size, resolution, or color. And quick bonus tip here, don't add any extra processing or sharpening while saving, as that's something you want to do whilst you're editing and not exporting. Okay, I'd love for you to jump to this video next, where I go through 5 ways that I customize my workspace in Capture One so that my editing workflow is seamless, fast, and my end results are nothing short of spectacular. Even if you don't use Capture One and you use Lightroom, there's a ton of information here that I think you'll find very handy. I'll catch you there.